Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Many consider Dr. Kay Scarpetta to be the first lady of forensic crime fiction, and her creator, legendary literary icon Patricia Cornwell, to be the founder of a new generation for the genre when Postmortem became an overnight bestseller and swept the awards circuit, setting a record when it took home the Edgar, the Creasy, the Anthony and McCavity Award, along with French Prix du Roman d'Adventure Prize, all in the same year. Whether you've seen her on the Today Show or Good Morning America, such immediate attention came her way, as Author Magazine reported, because Postmortem was the first bona fide forensic thriller. It paved the way for an explosion of entertainment featuring in all things forensic across film, television, and literature, while the BBC made the case that Cornwell invented the whole genre of forensic detective fiction, and has stayed a forerunner in the 30-plus years since with hit sequels like A Body of Evidence, All That Remains, Cruel and Unusual, The Body Farm, From Potter's Field, Cause of Death, Unnatural Exposure, Point of Origin, Black Notice, The Last Precinct, Blowfly, Trace, Predator, Book of the Dead, Scarpetta, The Scarpetta Factor, Port Mortuary, Red Mist, The Bone Bed, by which point Reuters crowned her a master storyteller as she kept giving fans more with Dust, Flesh and Blood, Depraved Heart and Chaos, where the Wall Street Journal declared that in Scarpetta, Patricia Cornwell has a character as strong as any in popular fiction, while the New York Times Book Review raved that when it comes to forensic sciences, nobody can touch Cornwell, and she's recently kicked off her fourth decade of Scarpetta with Autopsy and Livid, and even her own cookbook with Food to Die For, Secrets from Kay Scarpetta's Kitchen, along with other series she's kept fans entertained with, including Win Gerano and At Risk in the Front, and Andy Brazil and Judy Hammer's series with The Hornet's Nest, Southern Cross, and Isle of Dogs, along with the Captain Chase duology over Quantum and Spin, and nonfiction bestsellers like Portrait of a Killer, Jack the Ripper, Case Closed, and A Time for Remembering, the Ruth Graham Bell story. And Jamie Lee Curtis and Blumhouse Studios recently announced they were developing Scarpetta into a TV series, where Curtis told The Hollywood Reporter that Patricia Cornwell is a bona fide literary trailblazer to bring her beloved character Kay Scarpetta to life through the power of television, and to introduce her to an entirely new audience is exciting. Bringing to life a dark, fun, and layered work world and family life, spearheaded by the smart and sexy and indomitable Kay Scarpetta, is going to be a thrilling ride. And we're so honored that she's here today to talk about her amazing career over 40-plus years and 120 million books sold around the world. Miss Cornwell, thank you so much for being with us. How young do you first remember discovering your extraordinary gift as a storyteller?
I like to say it's because I've been writing since I was 5, but I think it's probably not the real reason. I mean, it's funny. I tell people, I say I'm like the statue in the park that everybody drives by every day. And they go, yeah, I've seen that forever, but I can't remember what it is. Really, ever since I was a little kid. And it wasn't so much just reading. And I wasn't the biggest reader in the world, but I was intrigued by stories, and I was always telling stories. And from the earliest I can remember, I was drawing pictures and writing stories. I was very imaginative, right? And behind this wall, there's a drawing I did when I was 6, that when John Glenn first went up in a rocket, and it was 1962, and I was 6 years old. So I drew a picture of a spaceman next to a monkey, next to a rocket that looks like a banana, by the way. And because in my little childlike imagination, the monkey was going with him, so they'd be friends. So I was always thinking of stories. And I would hope everybody does, because I think stories are really, without them, we don't have a life that's worth living.
Now, there's a very charming story among those early supporters of yours that stars Ruth Graham, wife of late legendary Reverend Billy Graham, that we would love to hear if you'd care to share.
I had people who encouraged me to write, and that made a really big difference. In fact, when I was 19, Ruth Graham, Billy Graham's wife, who lived up the street from us, she took me out to lunch one day, and she gave me this beautiful leather journal that she just bought in Switzerland. They'd been over there, and she said, I want you to write, because she'd read some poetry and things that I'd done, and she said, you're very talented, you should do this. And I had English teachers that would encourage me, and I think my 4th grade teacher was really instrumental. So she would put things, tape them up on the bulletin board. If you wrote a good story, or you drew a good picture. And those things, at that very sort of impressionable stage of your life, those things are really, really important. They mean more to you than a book award you win 30 years later, really do. Mrs. Skidmore, when I was in the fourth grade. In fact, when I did right before COVID, I did a LA live event with Jamie Lee Curtis, a chat on stage. This was like, I don't know, 4 years ago, last time we got to do anything much. And I invited her. She was in the audience. I flew Mrs. Skidmore to LA from little old Montreat, North Carolina, and she went to the event, and I gave her a shout out from the stage, and it was so hysterical. It was so great. And I thought, who would have ever imagined this when I was 9 years old, sitting in her classroom? Teachers don't get the spotlight that they deserve. And I mean, teachers make or break you. They really can. And I had wonderful English professors in college that really opened up my mind to storytelling. And when you read some of the greats and you kind of do an autopsy on them and understand why some of it is so powerful and why it is so effective, that's a whole new way of thinking. And so I've been very fortunate that I've met some really wonderful people.
You had about the best kind of hands-on research that a crime fiction novelist could dream of early on. Almost an unintended training course of sorts during your years as a journalist working for the Charlotte Observer, covering the police beat, including headline cover stories on prostitution and crime in the city's downtown area. Please reflect, if you would, on how those years helped prepare you for the amazing career that followed. From firsthand experience talking to every kind of character we can imagine, to developing law enforcement sources, or seeing how cop culture works, how they speak, act, and think, and of course, most importantly, investigate.
A lot of people don't quite understand that. First and foremost, I'm a journalist, and that's what I started out as. I was a journalist at the Charlotte Observer. I got the police beat about 6 months into the job. I started out updating the TV magazine and writing obituaries like everybody else. And then I got pushed into the police beat because the newspaper had a very bad relationship with that police department and needed a young, non-threatening female to go in there. And that was my introduction into the world of crime and telling stories about crime and being interested in the professionals that work in it. And the one elusive one was the medical examiner. I could not get an interview with that person. And I kept wondering, what are they doing with the body? Nobody seemed to know. So I began to pursue that as a journalist. With a journalist approach after my first book, which was a biography.
Richmond Magazine recently reminisced on the day 25 years ago when we featured Patricia Cornwell on the cover of our December 1994 issue. Cornwell talked about dealing with sudden fame after her first book, Postmortem, was released in 1990, became a bestseller, won numerous awards, and catapulted her into the international spotlight, ushering in a fascination with forensic science and popular culture. And the LA Times, in similar recognition of the importance of the moment within the genre's history and evolution, elevated you to the league of Edgar Allan Poe, from whom all mystery fiction is thought to flow, made scientific deduction one of its ingredients. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, inventing Sherlock Holmes' celebrated monograph on cigar ashes, made the great detective a kind of one-man amateur crime lab, although he occasionally used science as a bluff to induce miscreants to confess. Lately, forensic medicine, including the profiling of psychopathic types featured in Thomas Harris' The Silence of the Lambs. It has indeed launched the mystery writing career of Patricia Cornwell, who's been working in the Chief Medical Examiner's office in Richmond, Virginia, and is thus able to write with an uncommon knowledgeability. Did you first conceive the idea of writing a novel while working on your next job as a computer analyst at the real office of the Chief Medical Examiner of Virginia? And would you please talk about how art imitated life as you first began working on Postmortem in terms of setting, and specifically, please discuss a bit about how former Chief Medical Examiner Marcella Farinella Fierro, MD, who the New York Times mused, though she would never admit it, many argue was the catalyst for the explosion of forensic science television shows, movies, and books, helped influence and inspire the now legendary among fans Dr. Kay Scarpetta.
When I went to the medical examiner's office the first time in 1984, it was to interview Dr. Marcella Fierro, who later would become the first woman chief of Virginia. And I was so intrigued by everything she said and showed me. And I said, this is what I want to learn to master. And if you really want to learn something, go make yourself useful there. And as it turned out, I had to work there after a while because I couldn't get published. But that's how I ended up there, was to learn enough to write books. I just didn't think it would take me 6 years to do it. When I was married the first time to Charlie Cornwell, and he had gone to graduate school at UVA, and you know what that is, University of Virginia in Charlottesville. And we were living in Richmond, and he was always telling me these wild stories about a landlady he had in graduate school, whose last name was Scarpetta. And just this real character. But and I don't know anything much about her except that I thought, what an amazing name. I loved the name Scarpetta. And I thought, what would that be? Would it be Spanish? Would it be Italian? And I decided that was going to be the name of my character. And then I decided to make her Italian because I wanted her to cook Italian food, because I love all things Italian. And so, and then I said, and in fact, I was talking to Marcella Fierro about this way back in the day, and about using the name Scarpetta. And she said, well, you should have a really short name then, maybe Kay. I said, I like that. That's a good idea. So there she was. Kay Scarpetta was born back in 1984, long before she got published. What happened is, while I was working in the morgue, I was writing crime novels, and I wrote 3 before that. All of them got rejected, one year after another. And then I was another year working at the morgue because the last book had failed. And so this went on. And then in the late 80s, these serial murders started in Richmond. And it was absolutely horrifying. Everybody was terrorized because they were people minding their own business in their homes. The victims, nobody could say the victim had it coming, or they did something wrong, or they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I mean, these were just people living, and someone's climbing through their window. And so I was working at the ME's office when that was going on, and still writing these books that weren't working. And someone had given me the advice that you need to, we want to see what Scarpetta really sees. I mean, make her the main character. And what do you really see at the morgue? I don't think you see the kind of stuff you're writing about in these books. And it's because it was too painful for me. I did not want to let my imagination loose on what I was seeing every day when I was helping out with the autopsies down there and all the rest of it. And then these crimes began. And I didn't start the book right then, but after the person had been caught and all the rest of it, I thought, what would Scarpetta do if this happened on her watch? How would she handle it? And then I asked myself a question. Is it possible that you can write books about crime and not trivialize it or celebrate it? Because now that you've seen what you've seen, you could not bring it upon yourself to do that. That's why I used to get mad when people called my books mysteries, because I said, you don't call it a mystery when there's a dead body on a table. And so I thought, okay, there's only one way to do this. I'm going to have to do it in a way that's unflinching. If I'm going to show you this, I'm going to show it to you the way it is. I'm going to show you crime for what it really is. And I'm going to show you the good people that solve it. And I'm going to do it through this character, because as long as you have Scarpetta in the room, you'll never lose the humanity of what you're doing. Otherwise, it's really easy to cross the line and maybe try to celebrate what should be condemned.
Now, it's safe to say this series took off like a firestorm, especially after you followed it up with another bestseller in Body of Evidence. Within that expansion, there's a central relationship within the cast that begins when readers first meet the unforgettable genius IQ computer guru Lucy, Kay's 10-year-old niece in Body of Evidence, who's then 16 when we see her again in All That Remains, and crucially then begins aiding her aunt in the cases she's trying to crack, a trend that continues in Cruel and Unusual, The Body Farm, from Potter's Field, and Cause of Death as she grows up fast and joins the FBI at the tender age of 18, and then really develops her own following among fans as her storylines become almost a spin-off, even though she still works with her aunt. What was most thrilling for you from the beginning about writing Kay and Lucy's relationship? Could you, for instance, hear them talking back and forth in specific voices? And that's a bit of a fascinating process for a fiction author, isn't it? Watching a character grow up in your head, book in and out.
It's sort of like I'll be working on a scene, and then that Scarpetta's got to talk to somebody. Who's calling her? Hello. And then, well, who's this dude calling her at 3:00 in the morning? Because there's been another one, as he puts it, in postmortem. Lucy's a weird one because I don't know where she came from. I don't have kids. And at that stage of life, when I came up with Lucy, I didn't even have nieces that were even born yet. So I don't know where she came from, except that I knew that Scarpetta, when she went home to that house every day in postmortem and was nothing but the housekeeper there and the occasional boyfriend who was not necessarily the best of choices for her, she needed something to humanize her. She needed something to deal with that wasn't the horrors of work. She needed a nightmare that's her niece. Someone who's and so I just thought, I don't know where she came from, but she just sort of was there on the doorstep, and Scarpetta's like, oh, now what am I going to do? I got serial murders going on in the city, and I've got my niece because her mother doesn't want her home for a while. And it just seemed to be a thing to do, and I'm so glad I did. But yes, Lucy's gotten older now.
Now, your cases were unlike any that I had ever read about, or any other fan for that matter, of this genre when I started reading these books way back in high school, with respect especially to the forensics. And we're curious about how hands-on you like to get into the research and training into subspecialties, whether we're talking about forensic technologies, or ballistics, or weapon types, or pathologies and autopsies, or archaeological excavation, or weapons, and others that you've acquired and applied so effectively on the page over the years.
Anything that was available to me, I would try to go do it to learn.
Now, as a local Nashville author and show, we were dying to ask about our very own University of Tennessee's Anthropological Research Facility and the role it played as a central inspiration, we understand, in the writing of the Body Farm.
When I was working at the medical examiner's office, I used to go to professional meetings with Dr. Fierro and Bill Bass, who's the one who started the Body Farm at University of Tennessee. He was oftentimes a breakfast speaker. And that is the best thing to be doing, eating scrambled eggs and grits when Bill Bass is talking about the Body Farm. I'm going to push my plate away. And so he said, I was introduced to him, and this was when no one had ever heard of the place. This was like 10 years before I wrote the Body Farm. And he said, you should come visit. And so I eventually did come visit, not many, many times, as a matter of fact. And in the Body Farm, the book, I literally did an experiment there. I said, look, if I pay the research money, can we see what would happen to a body under certain circumstances, to one of the ones that you've had donated there? And they built a little shed and a concrete pallet, and they put this body there with something under it that I wanted to see what the pattern would be. And that is exactly, so when you read the Body Farm and you find out about that, that's a true story. And what I've described that Scarpetta sees is exactly what I saw in that research that was done there. So it's a remarkable place. And I think there's like 8 or 9 of them in the country now. There's a lot of body farms.
Is it ever a painful headspace writing from the victim's point of view? Whether we're talking about Meryl Stratton Madison in A Body of Evidence, or 11-year-old Emily Steiner in The Body Farm, our 9 unnamed victims in Point of Origin, our tennis star Drew Martin in The Book of the Dead, our Gail Shipton in Dust, or the beauty queen in Livid more recently, among many more, especially when you're having to recreate their death or killing on the page.
Not only just writing about it, but having some way to have exposure to things, because that creates feelings. And I'm going to give you an example of something happened when those serial killings were going on back in whenever it was, 1988 or something like that. And I was still of course, still working there full time. And I remember I was driving either to or from the office at a quiet time of the day. And I saw this car was circling our building. And I saw these two people, two Asian people looking out the window. And I realized they were probably the parents of the most recent victim, who was a 15-year-old Vietnamese girl whose parents had moved the family to America to raise her in a safe place. And this dude climbed through her window while the parents were home. And they found her, the next day in her room. And I mean, it's like the worst thing you can ever imagine this kind of stuff could happen. And I saw the look on the faces of these two people as they're staring at this 4-story stucco building. And I'm sure they're wondering what's happening to my daughter in there. And when you've seen the husband who's picking up the box of his wife's cremains, ashes, at the front desk in the lobby. And these people who, unlike me, they didn't walk through that door because they wanted to. Nobody wants to walk through that door, except I did, because I wanted to see what goes on in there. And what I say to anybody that wants to write about anything, try to put on those shoes, so to speak. Do something to see it for yourself. That's what autopsy means, to see for yourself, autopsia in Greek. And go see for yourself, because then you're going to feel something at you, and you will remember things in a way that you won't otherwise. That's what makes it real and palpable.
Fans of this beloved series met many of their favorite longtime recurring principles in the first few books. Whether we're talking about FBI profiler Benton Wesley, our Kay's sister Dorothy Farinelli, our reporter Abby Turnbull, our Kay's boss Alvin Ambergy, among many more. How deep of a character dive do you do on lead versus supporting cast characters, especially given some can first appear as a secondary one and then step into the spotlight in later books? And any favorites among these you most enjoyed reuniting with? And any favorites from among these or others you enjoyed reuniting with on the page, book in and out as the series went on?
You got to figure out who that is, and that becomes probably some combination of a lot of detectives. I used to, if you look behind me right here, you see my police hat back there from when my shoes. I still have my police shoes. See, those are my shoes I wore back on the beat. And so I would ride with the detectives every weekend to put in my hours because I hated wearing the uniform because all I really got to do was direct traffic, light flares, and take dog bite reports. So I would go plain clothes and ride with the detectives on the weekends and take notes for them and do stuff. And that's where the characters come from. You hang around with detectives and you get to know them, or you hang around with the lab workers and you meet these characters, and then somehow one of them becomes Niels Vander, who's always going up and down the hall with the ink stains on his lab coat, who's the fingerprints examiner. And these people, I don't really always know where they come from. But I don't think it would happen if I didn't go out and meet real people.
Has stepping into the rank and role of Richmond Police Department Detective Sergeant Pete Marino, book in and out, been one you've especially enjoyed playing?
That reminds me very much of the relationship that my friend Dr. Fierro had with the cops. She was the one everybody wanted to the crime scenes, Marcella Fierro. She, the one who taught me everything I know. And I would watch the way her banter with these old guys, some of them really rough from out in the middle of nowhere. And here's this woman doctor, and they never seen in fact, some people would say a woman doctor shouldn't be working in a place like that. He shouldn't be exposed to things like that. This lady who was climbing down in a well to get out skeletal remains and dealing with the carnage of a serial killer. And, and she gets in court and they're calling her ma'am all the time, trying to take away from how smart she is and how good she is at what she does. And so Marino is just kind of a counterpart. He's like those good old cops that she started out with. And he's been remade a few times and is now in the modern age and is trying to get with the program. But they have like an office marriage, you might say. I mean, she probably spends more time with him than she does with her husband. And so they have a very interesting relationship. And now it's really interesting because Marino is married to Scarpetta's sister, Dorothy. In Autopsy, the last book, you find that out, and you see it in Livid when they're all together. And that's a whole new wrinkle in things too. Imagine that. And now he's her brother-in-law.
Is it ever hard to part with a character you've grown attached to and maybe no readers have as well? Say, for instance, Benton Wesley, who appears to die in Black Notice.
Well, here's what happened with that. When Benton Wesley, I just say he went missing. When he went missing in Point of Origin, and we all thought he was dead, and in Black Notice he was dead, and Scarpetta it was a sad time for her, and I kept having people getting so mad at me about him being gone, and Scarpetta wasn't very happy about it either. I come to find out. So I was at this book signing, and one of the people raised their hands to ask a question and said, "Are you sure he's dead?" And I said, "Well, now that you mention it, I wasn't there when it happened. I mean, she wasn't there when it happened, so I can't attest to it." And then I thought, I better look into that. So soon after that, I was at the Richmond Medical Examiner's office, the one that replaced the old one that since has been torn down. And somebody was dealing with a death certificate problem, and it dawned on me. I thought, well, you can fake this stuff. And we know that now for sure. And how do you know he's not a protected witness for some reason? And there we go. And so next thing you know, in Blowfly, he comes walking in. I mean, the book opens and there he is walking around Cambridge. And I said, "Oh man, if Scarpetta could see you right now, she'd be so happy." And he says, "Don't worry, she will soon enough." So I had to bring him back because, some people quit reading the series after that. They were so upset. So I want people to know he's back and he's fine.
Another important shift in the series arrived at the end of The Last Precinct, when you made the decision to relocate Dr. Scarpetta to Florida to become a private forensic consultant. And how did that new backdrop provide any fresh inspiration for Blowfly? And then in Predator, when she becomes the head of the National Forensic Academy, founded by niece Lucy. What's kept it fun for you continuing to give her new backdrops to investigate within? We can think of others more recently, like her moving in the Book of the Dead to Charleston, South Carolina, and then Massachusetts and Scarpetta and the Scarpetta Factor she's in New York City.
After the last precinct, no offense to Richmond, and I love Richmond, but I really just, I felt I had used it up. And I was spending a lot of time in Florida and New York, and I'd tell Scarpetta, look, here's the deal. You have to move where I do, or else I'm going to have to move where you are. And so I tried that for a while, where I would move her where I was, and like Massachusetts, where she was for the last umpteen years, with those cases up there, those books, the last ones, at least the last four. And so I think, anyway, but I tell you, I've learned that's not the best thing to do. I thought people would like it. I think they'd like to see new places and different medical examiner systems and this and that. But I think in this world today, we much more want something cozy and close. We want a setting that's a character. We want neighbors. We might stay inside with our masks on, but we still want neighbors. We want to feel we live in a world with other people in it, because life has become so remote and scary the last 3 or 4 years that I think having Scarpetta back in Virginia, in the little city of Old Town, Alexandria, population about 10,000, right outside of Washington. I love, and it goes back to the colonial days, the 1700s. And that to me feels the right thing to do now, and not to change the scenery very much. I want to mine areas of Virginia and have it be familiar and have it be places that she remembers from the old days. Because that seems to be the right texture and the right shading for stories right now, for me anyway.
Within Blowfly, why did it feel right to shift from writing in the first to the third person?
Well, after I did the last precinct, and that was number 10 in 10 years, and I honestly was thinking, wow, I'm having a bit, I sort of need to do something else. And I was a little bit ahead. I was ahead of schedule. And when I did the Jack the Ripper book, and that, of course, is an omniscient point of view. That's, you're telling a story, you're a narrator. And I thought, I bet the Scarpetta books would be better if I could show you what everybody's doing, more like a movie, and do it third person point of view. But people didn't like that. That was not popular with my readers. And I did not realize at the time, I think I know why. I think when it's the first person point of view, I hate to use these jargony phrases, but in other words, I did this instead of she did it. When it's first person point of view, I think you feel safe because you're with her. And if you walk into the cooler, if you walk into a crime scene and it's her that you're with, somehow it's going to be okay. And I think when she's not the one really telling the story, I think it was harder for people.
Now, you're one of the true masters of writing really complex, frightening, compelling antagonists, on par with Thomas Harris and Jeffrey Deaver, from Roy McCorkle as Mr. Nobody in Postmortem, who we hear serial killer Timothy Wilson Spencer helped inspire, or say the Colonial Parkway killer Stephen Spurrier in All That Remains, are really nasty characters from other novels in the series, like the Temple Galt from Potter's Field, our Edgar Allan Poe in Trace, our Daniel Morse in Dust, or especially the super creepy serial killer in The Bone Bed. The list just goes on and on, through more recent creeps like those we meet in Autopsy and Livid. What's the key to showing violence in a scene as graphically as you have to without it being overwhelming for the reader?
My stuff's pretty brutal. It's graphic, and the violence is scary. I don't try to gross you out with it, but it's just the nature of the world I show you. I spend a lot of time figuring out how I'm going to show it to you, because I find it so painful. And I try to do a lot by saying very little. I also don't want to gross people out. And I could, especially in Livid, in this new one with the autopsy of the woman in the early part of it. There's some pretty graphic stuff that you could gross people out. And I just I'm not trying to do that at all. And so I'm careful. I feel the fear and the pain of the victim. And you'll see in Livid, I try to handle these things very delicately. And I've also gotten to where, this is going to sound weird to say, I'm much more merciful. I try to have as little suffering as I can, and oftentimes people who are killed end up not being the nicest people. I've decided I can't kill people all the time that are. I don't know. It's getting harder for me to kill people in my books. What can I say? The one that still intrigues me the most was Jean-Baptiste Chandon from Black Notice. The poor guy who had hypertrichosis, who grew up, from very, very wealthy families. It's like a tale from long ago where you have this child born in a hotel, on Ile Saint Louis in Paris, and wealthy established parents, but he's got this hideous disorder where he looks like a wolf man. It's a real thing. And I feel, I don't know. That's one of these bad guys. I kind of, now Benton supposedly killed him, but maybe he's not gone either, because I kind of want to see him again. I feel kind of sorry for him. I don't know why. He did some terrible things, but I think he had a bad life. So I don't know. If I saw him in my window, though, I wouldn't be happy about it. I might think it was Bigfoot, though, and I'd be happy to see Bigfoot. Anyway, Cary Grethyn and Temple Galt, that killing duo, and they have a lot of fans, believe it or not, out there. They're scary people. From Potter's Field in particular, and the fact that Cary Grethyn started, sort of tucked Lucy under her wing at the FBI Academy, and there's that crazy relationship between the two of them. And we don't really know what's happened to her either. Cary Grethyn's kind of out there floating around somewhere. In Chaos, I believe it was, she had a bad encounter towards the end of the book, but she's not dead. So we don't know who's going to resurface, but I don't have any plans for it. It doesn't mean they don't, though.
By the time you hit that always impressive mark of a quarter century, 25 years into the series, with Flesh and Blood, Depraved Heart and Chaos, it's safe to say that you knew Dr. Scarpetta pretty well. What, reflecting back, do you feel like was really driving her case in and out by then?
I think that the key to what makes her work is that she has this relentless attitude that we can be better. We can be better. Humans can be better. I don't have to put my hands up to my elbows in this every damn day. That we have to do better, and we will do better. That it's not just Scarpetta going out there and cleaning up the mess that people make. I think that she's a crusader who goes out there and says, I will clean this up. I will find out what went on and who did it, but we can do better. We can be more highly evolved than this. And by the way, she's pretty darn highly evolved. If everybody was like Scarpetta, we would not have wars or problems in the world.
You made what's always a brave decision for any series author to effectively retire Dr. Scarpetta after that point, and ventured out into other exciting series over the next few years with teams like the Andy Brazil and Judy Hammer over the course of Hornet's Nest, Southern Cross, and Isle of Dogs, and then walking in Win Gerano's footsteps and Headspace in the course of At Risk and Out Front, and then out into space with Quantum and Spin. What was most fascinating for you about venturing out into this new creative orbit?
I did and I didn't. It was hard. I mean, it's mind-withering when you're trying to learn about quantum physics, when you drop chemistry after 3 days in college, and when someone's explaining to you what pi means and they're doing the math. I mean, I have a friend's dissertation that someone gave me, a NASA person, and you're talking like a math problem is 100 pages long. And I said, what happens if you don't get it right in the end after all that? You get to the last page and it's like, oh, darn, it's off a decimal. Anyway, I found it at times somewhat overwhelming, but I loved what I got to learn about opening my mind to space and all the planets out there and who we might be and where we might be from and why Mars is important and what we're going to do on the moon and all the things that I continue to learn about because I have friends who, work at Space Force or NASA and things like that. And we need to be looking up, look beyond. Everything isn't in front of your own nose. And you should wonder, that's what stories are for, to open those windows in your mind to wondering why we're here and what is this all about.
Now, at what point for longtime fans did Dr. K. Scarpetta come knocking back on the door of your imagination and asking to return to the page in what was a true delight for readers with Autopsy and then Livid back to back? And what was different about writing these two newest volumes in the series after having a few years apart from one another as character and author?
Well, the thing that I've enjoyed most is that Scarpetta is talking to me. when I first started autopsy or thought of it, it was right when COVID was still surging, and I had finished my Captain Chase books, the space thrillers, and I didn't have a contract for anything. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And then, and things were so crazy. I mean, I'd look out my window at the Boston Harbor and you didn't see a single boat. You didn't see a single plane flying overhead and see a single person walking around. Or Stacy and I would go drive somewhere and there was nobody on the road. It was like it was really like Armageddon. And so I thought, what would Scarpetta do in this world if I brought her back? And so this is literally what I did. I imagined where she was because I hadn't seen her in years. I hadn't. I was too busy doing NASA stuff and all that, and I was done with that series. And so I had not seen her in years or really thought of her very much, and because I thought I was done with that. And so I just imagined where she was, and I saw her sitting in a garden, a very old garden by a very old house. And I realized it was in Northern Virginia and probably in the Alexandria area because I just had this image of all this colonial stuff everywhere. And she's sitting there, not doing anything. Maybe she was sipping tea or a bottle of water. Maybe she'd been working in her garden. I think she might have been. And I just imagined that I sat down at the table, wrought iron, and said, "Would you want to work a case? I mean, the world's kind of screwed up right now. What do you think? Do you think we could do another one?" She said, "Maybe. You have something interesting, I might help you." I said, "Oh, that's a big yes. Now I better come up with something good or she won't show up, damn it." So I started investigating and, I saw her then opening but standing in her office, her new office in Northern Virginia, looking out at people in the parking lot, realizing she doesn't know anybody. She's only been there a few weeks. And then, of course, she's got to check the cooler on the way down because of that body that she found at the railroad tracks, it's cut her throat cut and her hands missing. And, oh yeah, there's just that little problem she's got to deal with on her way out the door because something else is going on. And all I can tell you is it's taken me a while, but I feel that she's back in the room. And I realize how much I like it better when she is. I think I do better in every way if she's around. So I'm glad she's back.
Along with the astonishing 120 million books that fans have added to their bookshelves over the last 40 years, you've been appropriately awarded and acknowledged throughout your career with every award an author could covet, from the Sherlock Award for Best Detective Author to the Golden Dagger Award, the RBA Thriller Award, and even the Medal of Chevalier from the Order of Arts and Letters. What does it mean to you to hear from your peers or your generations of readers that your books have had and continue to hold such important places in their lives? And what advice do you give those among that crowd who've reached out over the years through emails or letters, or at conferences, lectures, or lines at book signings saying they want to follow in your footsteps?
There's just almost really no words for what it means to me. It means that I've lived a life that has some purpose, because it's great to be a best-selling author and have success and all the incredible gifts that I've had. But at the end of the day, I want to feel I've done something that makes a difference, not just in my life, no, but other people's lives. I mean, I want to feel I've given them something. I mean, look at all I've been given. Look at this beautiful office I'm in and all the cool stuff I have. I want to give people something that too. And if I can inspire them or make them try one more time on that book they've given up on, or law school that they've always dreamed about, or being a doctor, or just solving their own puzzle or problem, what I say to them is, you'd be surprised what you can do if you put your mind to it. So try a little harder and don't give up.
Can fans look forward to seeing more Kay in the near future?
I have a new idea for a new story that I'm working on, and I'm excited about it. I'm not going to talk about it yet, but it's a subject that I think some people will be very, very surprised that I have decided to look into, and that Scarpetta's going to have to look into. And if you may guess it eventually, but you probably won't guess it right now. And so I'm in the early stages of that. But the thing that keeps me going is if I have a story to tell and it seems to come alive, and what helps fuel me is knowing people want it. I mean, honestly, if I thought nobody wanted to read this anymore, I really wouldn't do it anymore. Because why bother? It takes up my whole life, and I don't want to bore people with something they're not interested in. So hopefully we can all keep our dance together, because I think we all have a lot to say to each other still. When I say I mean, me and I mean the readers, we're all in this together.
Variety recently shared the exciting news that Jamie Lee Curtis and Blumhouse Studios will be bringing Dr. K. Scarpetta to the TV screen. With Blumhouse television president Chris McCummer commenting, "We're so honored to be partnering with one of the most successful authors in history," while Curtis praised you as a bona fide literary trailblazer. Adding that collaborating with her on bringing her beloved character Kay Scarpetta to life through the power of television and to introduce her to an entirely new audience is exciting. Please share your reaction to this long overdue news when you first got it, and how is the development process going so far?
Hopefully the television show that Jamie Lee Curtis is the producer on, I was just talking to her yesterday before we did our big Zoom, and I'll be meeting with some of her folks out in LA pretty soon. And we're trying to get that on track. So there's some TV stuff maybe going on.
Finally, you dove into a fascinating true life biography with Portrait of a Killer. Please reveal for viewers who don't know, who is the real Jack the Ripper?
Walter Sickert. Based on evidence for the letters that Walter Sickert wrote to people and that Jack the Ripper wrote, and all sorts of other things, including his own obsession with Jack the Ripper and his paintings and so many things. But the watermark matches and forensic paper evidence are the biggest reason. And I highly recommend, if people are interested in the Ripper, read my newest version. Is called Ripper, The Secret Life of Walter Sickert. And that's nonfiction. It's my investigation. And by the way, I didn't do the science in this book. Real people did it. I'm reporting on it. Scotland Yard's the one who told me about Sickert to begin with. And so, but if you want to know about that case, I hope you'll read it. I'm not happy he was Jack the Ripper, because I think he must have had a miserable life. But I do believe that Walter Sickert was Jack the Ripper.
Ms. Cornwell, it's been a true privilege. Thank you so much for taking out time today to be on About the Authors TV.